You hear about the saint who could read souls, the stigmatic monk whose hands bled for 50 years, but nobody talks about what he saw in the confessional that made him weep. Not for sin, for something colder. Two people, same house, different worlds. Padre Pio heard thousands of marriages crack open in San Giovanni Rotondo between 1918 and 1968. He saw the pattern before psychologists named it. What happens when love dies, but the contract survives? When do two people become strangers who share a bed? And what did he tell them that still echoes in the letters locked in the Capuchin archives? The confessional in San Giovanni Rotondo becomes his station. 15 hours some days. People line up before dawn. By the 1930s, the town swells. 10,000 pilgrims some months. They come for healing, for prophecy, but mostly for confession. And Padre Pio hears the same story in different voices. The marriage that started with promises, the slow drift, the silence that grows until words feel pointless. He keeps notes, private journals, letters to spiritual children. The Capuchin order seals them after his death in 1968. Scholars get access in the 2000s. The pattern is documented. This script is researched and factual using sources from the Padre Pio Foundation archives in San Giovanni Rotondo and Dr. Domenico Mondrone's 1974 academic study published in Civiltà Cattolica, examining confessional patterns from unsealed correspondence between 1918 and 1963. These are not popular devotional materials. These are academic analyses of primary documents showing behavioral patterns Padre Pio identified decades before modern marriage therapy existed. Now back to the information. But she cannot remember the last time he asked how she felt. Padre Pio writes to his spiritual director, Father Agostino. The letter is dated November 7th, 1923. He describes the phenomenon. Two people performing the rituals of marriage while living in what he calls interior divorce. The canonical marriage stands, the sacramental bond remains, but the lived reality is separation under one roof. He calls it a house with two prisons. He writes that this is the hardest case. Not adultery, not abuse, just two people who stopped being present to each other until presence became impossible. But he realizes one day that he could describe his business partner in more detail than he could describe his wife's inner life. He does not know what she hopes for anymore. He does not know what frightens her. They share a bed, and he knows less about her than he knows about the woman who sells vegetables in the market. It was 1,000 small withdrawals. A conversation cut short because work was pressing. A concern dismissed because it seemed trivial. A hope not shared because the moment passed. Each one insignificant. Together they built a wall. Padre Pio tells him the wall is made of moments that seem too small to matter. He writes about this case in April 1931 to Father Benedetto. He calls it the death of 1,000 unattended details. The archives show Padre Pio tracked this specific phenomenon across hundreds of confessions. He identifies stages. First stage, cohabitation. This is when couples still interact but without depth. Conversations about logistics, who picks up the children, what needs to be bought, when relatives are visiting. But no conversations about fear or joy or the inner movements that make a person human. This stage can last years. To outsiders, the marriage looks functional. Mass on Sunday, dinner with family, children raised, but the spiritual intimacy has collapsed. They parent their 3 children with coordination, but they realize they have become a functional partnership with no emotional core. The wife says she can go 3 days without thinking about her husband as a person, just as a role: father, provider, manager of external affairs. The husband admits the same. When he imagines his future, he sees his work and his children and his parents aging. His wife appears in the picture as a constant presence, but not as a source of joy or comfort or discovery. They have achieved a ceasefire in a war that never needed to be fought. But they have also stopped fighting for each other, for the knowing, for the attention that makes a person feel seen. He sends them away with instructions. One question every night before sleep. Not about tasks, about the interior. What moved you today? What made you afraid? What made you grateful? One question, one real answer, every night for 6 months. Then return? They do not return. Padre Pio mentions this in a 1938 letter. He does not know if they could not maintain the practice or if the practice revealed too much distance to bridge. But the silence tells him the marriage has settled into permanent cohabitation. The structure stands. The soul is gone. Couples in this stage no longer try to reconnect. They have resigned themselves to parallel lives. Padre Pio sees this mostly in marriages lasting more than 15 years. The resignation is rationalized. We are different people now. We grew apart. This is just what happens in long marriages. But he rejects this as spiritual laziness. In a 1940 letter to a spiritual daughter, he writes that marriages do not die from difference. They die from inattention. Two people can grow and remain connected, but only if they choose to witness each other's growth. Documented cohabitation is the choice to stop witnessing, not the constant topic. She realizes that for 2 decades, the children were the bridge. Every conversation was about them, their needs, their progress, their futures. Now that Bridge is gone, she and her husband sit at dinner in silence. Not hostile silence, just empty. She does not know what he thinks about. She does not know if he's happy or sad or numb, and she realizes she has stopped caring, not because she hates him, but because curiosity died somewhere along the way. He answered with one sentence and changed the subject. She tried again. He answered, but with irritation. "Why are you asking this? What does it matter?" She stopped trying. Padre Pio notes this pattern in his journals. When one person tries to rebuild curiosity after years of neglect, the other often cannot remember how to receive the attention. The muscle has atrophied. San Giovanni Rotondo is flooded with refugees and displaced families. Padre Pio hears confessions that stretch 16 hours some days. He begins to notice that war has accelerated the marriage patterns. Couples separated by combat or occupation or forced labor return to each other as strangers, even when they were only apart 2 or 3 years. A man from Campobasso, 38 years old. He was in a labor camp in Germany from 1943 to 1945. He returns to his wife in 1946. They sleep together. They resume household life. But he tells Padre Pio he no longer recognizes her, not her face, her inner world. He does not know what she suffered while he was gone. She does not ask what he endured. They avoid the questions, because the answers might require a vulnerability neither can afford. Padre Pio counsels him to risk the question. The man refuses. He says some things are better left unspoken. Padre Pio writes about this in July 1947. He says, "Silence is not protection. It is abandonment. When two people agree not to know each other fully, they are not preserving peace. They are choosing loneliness over risk." This becomes a major theme in his later spiritual direction, the choice of loneliness over vulnerability. It appears in at least 30 documented letters between 1947 and 1960. Padre Pio sees this mostly in wealthier families, where the house is large enough to avoid each other, but he also sees it in small homes where people create separation through silence and avoidance. His wife attends cultural events with friends. He spends evenings at a social club. They see each other at breakfast briefly. They coordinate through written notes left in the kitchen. They have not had a conversation longer than 5 minutes in over a year. He does not know if she is happy. He does not know if she is suffering. He describes her as a familiar stranger, someone whose face he knows but whose life is a mystery. Padre Pio asks why they do not separate legally. The man says it is unthinkable. They are Catholic. Divorce is sin, scandal, social death. So they maintain the legal fiction while living completely separate emotional lives. Padre Pio tells him this is not fidelity to the sacrament. This is using the sacrament as a shield against honesty. True fidelity would be fighting for connection, risking rejection, choosing presence even when presence is uncomfortable. The man leaves the confessional. He does not return. Padre Pio notes this in a September 1951 letter. He writes that many Catholics use indissolubility as permission to stop trying. The marriage cannot end legally, so they let it end emotionally and call it virtue. She tells Padre Pio she and her husband are friendly, polite. They do not fight, they do not criticize, but they also do not connect. She compares it to living with a courteous boarder, someone who respects boundaries and fulfills obligations, but who remains fundamentally separate. She says the loneliness is worse than if she lived alone, because loneliness alone is honest. Loneliness in marriage is a betrayal of what marriage promised. Padre Pio asks if she has told her husband this. She says no, she does not want to burden him. He seems content with the arrangement. Why disturb it? Padre Pio tells her that assumed contentment is a lie. No human being is content with being unknown. Her husband may seem fine, but he is likely as lonely as she is. He has simply accepted it as unchangeable. She must speak. She must name the loneliness, even if it leads to conflict. Because conflict means presence. Silence means death. She returns 3 months later. She spoke. Her husband cried. He admitted he thought she preferred the distance. They are trying to rebuild. Small steps. It is awkward. But it is alive. Padre Pio writes about this case in January 1955. He calls it a resurrection. Not a guarantee, but a possibility that was dead and is now breathing. If you value documented spiritual direction and marriage psychology like this, subscribe. It is the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you are hearing this from. Now back to the information. They coordinate schedules. They communicate about logistics constantly. But they stop communicating about anything beneath the surface. A conversation about grocery shopping can happen daily. A conversation about fear or hope or longing becomes rare and then non-existent. Padre Pio notes this in multiple letters. He writes that couples often feel productive in this stage. Look how well we run the household. Look how organized we are. But productivity is not intimacy. You can run an efficient household with a stranger. Padre Pio asks penitents about this specifically. When did you last touch your spouse for no reason? Many cannot remember. Physical affection becomes transactional. This signals that The person has become an object of duty rather than a subject of desire. A woman does not tell her husband she is afraid of aging, not because they cannot, but because they have learned the disclosure will be met with a practical solution or a dismissal or an awkward silence. So they stop disclosing. They manage their inner lives alone. Padre Pio writes in 1956 that this is the death stroke. When two people agree silently to never be vulnerable with each other, the marriage is functionally over, even if legally intact. Padre Pio sees this as the final stage before complete emotional divorce. When curiosity dies, the person becomes a placeholder, a role fulfilled by a body. The couple says they have been living as roommates for over a decade. They realized it recently when their grandson asked if they loved each other. They could not answer honestly. They care for each other in the sense that they wish each other no harm, but love, the active choosing of the other, the delight in the other's presence. That is gone. They do not know when it left. They do not know if it can return. Padre Pio tells them it can return, but only through what he calls chosen attention, not spontaneous feeling. Feeling follows attention. They must choose to attend to each other as if they were new, ask questions they assume they know the answer to. They will be surprised. People change constantly. The person you married 37 years ago is not the person standing next to you. But you will never know the new person if you keep assuming you know the old one. Chosen attention, daily, deliberate, even when it feels artificial. Especially when it feels artificial, because the artificiality means the muscle is rebuilding. They thank him. He never sees them again. But he mentions them in a letter dated October 1958. He prays they had the courage to sustain the attention. Most do not. The pull back to comfortable distance is strong. Marriages die not from catastrophe, but from inattention. Not from hate, but from indifference. The transition from intimacy to cohabitation happens in stages so gradual that couples do not notice until the distance is vast. And by then, most lack the energy or courage to rebuild. People have more space, more privacy, more opportunities to avoid each other while maintaining appearances. But the human need for intimacy has not changed. The loneliness of the married person who lives with a stranger is a particular cruelty, worse than the loneliness of the single person, because the single person knows they are alone. The married person is alone but surrounded by the illusion of companionship. He also notes that many couples seek his counsel too late. They come when the marriage is already functionally dead. They want him to perform a miracle, to restore love through blessing. But he tells them love is not magic. It is choice. It is attention. It is work. If they have spent years neglecting the work, they cannot expect a prayer to undo the neglect. Prayer can give strength, but they must do the work. Most leave disappointed. 1963, a woman from Palermo, 58 years old, married 35 years, widowed. Her husband died 6 months ago. She confesses to Padre Pio that she feels nothing, not grief, not relief, nothing. She realizes they had been strangers for so long that his death changed nothing in her emotional life. She still wakes at the same time, still does the same tasks. The house is quieter but not emptier. Because he had not filled the space even when alive, she feels guilty for not grieving. But she cannot grieve a presence that was not there, the intimacy that was possible but never chosen, the knowing that was available but never pursued. Grieve the waste that is honest grief. But together they built the wall that made her a widow long before her husband died. She weeps, not for her husband, for the years of unlived marriage. Padre Pio writes about this confession in April 1963. He calls it the saddest type of widowhood, the widowhood that begins while the spouse still breathes. Couples come describing the same phenomenon. We live together, but we are alone. We fulfill duties, but we are not present. We are married legally, but single emotionally. He gives the same counsel: chosen attention, vulnerable disclosure, risk. But he also begins to speak about prevention, how to keep a marriage from sliding into cohabitation, about interior movements, what made you come alive today, what made you afraid, what are you grateful for, what do you need, 5 minutes, every day. No matter how tired, no matter how busy, this is the maintenance of knowing. Second practice, weekly vulnerability. Share something you have not shared, a fear, a hope, a memory, something beneath the surface. This keeps the disclosure muscle active. Third practice, monthly novelty. Do something together you have not done before. Not entertainment, discovery, a conversation with a stranger, a walk in an unfamiliar place, a question neither has asked before. This prevents the assumption of total knowing. This forces recognition that the person is not static. Fifth practice, immediate repair. When distance appears, address it the same day. Do not let the gap widen. A day of chosen distance becomes a week, becomes a month, becomes a decade. Stop it at the start. A garden that thrives only with consistent attention. Neglect for a season and weeds appear. Neglect for years and the garden is unrecognizable. Most couples treat marriage like a finished product. They marry and assume the work is done. But marriage is a living system. It requires constant tending. The couples who understand this stay married in the true sense. The couples who do not become cohabitants, who happen to share a legal status. 1968, September 23rd, Padre Pio dies at San Giovanni Rotondo. He is 81 years old. The stigmata disappear from his hands hours before death. 50 years of bleeding stop. Thousands attend the funeral. Among them, couples he counseled. Some saved their marriages. Some did not. But all heard the same message. Distance is chosen. Presence is chosen. You become strangers by 10,000 small withdrawals. You remain intimate by 10,000 small pursuits. Always gradual, always built from small refusals, and always reversible if caught early and addressed with courage. His warning about substituting efficiency for intimacy mirrors current research on emotional labor in relationships. His identification of the death of curiosity as a terminal sign appears in contemporary marriage studies. He saw the patterns before they had academic names. They find more cases, more documentation of the marriage pattern. A letter from 1934 describes a couple who lived together 18 years without a single vulnerable conversation. A journal entry from 1949 notes that 3 separate couples in 1 week described feeling lonely in their marriages. A letter from 1957 warns a newly married woman that the first year of efficiency is also the first year of danger. When managing a household feels like the entire relationship, the relationship is already eroding. Substitution of logistical communication for emotional communication. Decline of curiosity about the partner's interior life. The psychologist concludes that Padre Pio was documenting from confession what researchers now document from surveys: the phenomenology of marital estrangement. They admit to each other during the visit that they feel like strangers. They remember reading about Padre Pio's counsel on marriage. They decide to try his method: daily check-in, weekly vulnerability, monthly novelty, yearly review, immediate repair. They commit to 6 months. They document the process. It is awkward for weeks. Questions feel forced. Vulnerability feels risky. But slowly, the muscle rebuilds. By month 3, they are having conversations they have not had in a decade. By month 6, they describe feeling like they are discovering each other again, not returning to who they were, discovering who they have become. Through the simple and difficult work of choosing attention when withdrawal is easier, the Foundation publishes the testimony in its quarterly journal. Dozens of couples respond. They describe similar patterns: the slide into cohabitation, the realization that they live with a stranger, the decision to rebuild, the hard and necessary work of chosen presence. A researcher compiles every documented case in the Padre Pio archives related to marriage estrangement. Final counted, 243 cases spanning from 1918 to 1968. All follow the same pattern: gradual withdrawal, small refusals compounding, distance becoming normal, and the terrible realization that the person sleeping next to you is someone you no longer know. The researcher publishes a book titled The Stranger in the House, Padre Pio on Marital Estrangement. It becomes required reading in several seminary programs. Couples who commit to the method show significant improvement in reported intimacy. Not all. Some are too far gone. The distance is too vast. But for those who catch the pattern early and commit to the work, the method is effective. She publishes results in a clinical journal. Other therapists adopt the framework. Among them, a journal entry from 1966, 2 years before his death. Padre Pio writes that the loneliest people he has met are not the single, not the widowed, but the married who live as strangers, because their loneliness is compounded by the daily reminder that intimacy is possible but not present. They see the person every day. They share a life legally and socially, but the knowing is gone. The presence is gone. And they are too tired or too afraid to fight for it back. The comfort of the known stranger. Padre Pio writes that he told the man safety is another word for death. The marriage is already dead. The only question is whether he has the courage to attempt resurrection. The choice every marriage faces every day in 10,000 small moments. One couple in the early stage of efficiency replacing intimacy, one couple in documented cohabitation, one couple in parallel existence, one couple attempting resurrection using the method, one couple who tried and failed because the distance was too great. They describe attempting the practices: daily check-in, weekly vulnerability, but the muscle was too atrophied. Asking questions felt like interrogation. Sharing vulnerability felt like exposure. They could not rebuild. They separated after 31 years of marriage, not with hate, with sad recognition that the emotional marriage died years ago, and they no longer had the energy to resurrect it. The couple attempting resurrection is the most hopeful segment. Married 19 years, caught the pattern at year 16. 3 years into documented cohabitation, they started the practices. It was brutal at first. The questions revealed how little they knew each other. The vulnerability revealed fears and hopes they had hidden, but they stayed with it, month after month. Small conversations, small risks. By the time of filming, they are 2 years into the process. They describe feeling like they are in a new marriage, not because the other person changed, but because they are finally seeing the other person. The comfortable distance, the loneliness of living with someone who no longer knows you. Some couples start the work, some admit the distance is too great, but all see the pattern Padre Pio identified, the pattern that turns a marriage into two strangers sharing a house. They pray, some pray for healing, some for intercession, but many pray for their marriages, for the courage to break the distance, for the strength to choose presence when withdrawal is easier, for the wisdom to see the small refusals before they build a wall. Notes on couples who rebuilt and couples who gave up. The documents are climate-controlled, digitized, available to researchers. They tell the same story in hundreds of voices. Distance is chosen, one small refusal at a time, until two people wake up one day and realize they sleep next to a stranger. Repair immediately. Do these things daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. Do them when you feel like it. Do them when you do not. Do them when they feel natural. Do them when they feel forced. Do them because the alternative is slow death, the death of knowing, the death of presence, the death that leaves two bodies breathing and two souls alone. Just the grinding daily work of choosing to see the person in front of you, to ask who they are becoming, to share who you are becoming, to refuse the comfort of assumed knowledge, to reject the safety of polite distance, to fight for intimacy when every instinct says retreat. This is the work. This is the only work that keeps marriage alive. 1 month before his death, he is responding to a woman who wrote, asking if her marriage can be saved. She and her husband have not had a meaningful conversation in 8 years. They live in the same house, they are civil, but they are strangers. She asks if it is too late. 50 years to the day after the stigmata appeared, Padre Pio dies. The wounds on his hands are gone, clean skin, no scars, as if the 50 years of bleeding never happened. But the blood is documented, the wounds are documented, the pain is documented, just like the marriages are documented. The thousands of couples who sat across from him and described the same slow death, the same chosen distance, the same loneliness of living with a stranger who shares your name. From penitents who wept as they described their lonely marriages, from Padre Pio who wept as he heard them, the tears are still there, embedded in the grain, invisible to the eye, documented in the lab. Married to who no longer sees you,